The Arakan Army, or AA, is a powerful rebel group operating in Rakhine State, Myanmar. Founded in 2008, the AA claims to fight for the rights of the Buddhist Rakhine people. It seeks greater autonomy for Rakhine State within Myanmar. The AA's leader is Tun Myat Naing, a charismatic figure with significant support among the Rakhine population. The group is well equipped and trained, posing a significant challenge to the Myanmar military. The AA's primary objective is to establish an independent Rakhine state. They argue that the Rakhine people have historically faced discrimination and marginalization. The group's ideology is rooted in Rakhine nationalism, emphasizing their distinct cultural and historical identity. The AA's rise has been fueled by ethnic grievances and dissatisfaction with the central government. Their emergence has significantly altered the political landscape in Rakhine State. Their control over territory and resources has given them leverage over both the Myanmar military and the Rohingya population. The AA's relationship with the Rohingya is complex and fraught with tension. While the AA claims to fight for all ethnic groups, their actions have often targeted the Rohingya. The AA's growing influence has raised concerns about further violence and instability. Their conflict with the Myanmar military has resulted in widespread displacement and human rights abuses. The international community calls for a peaceful resolution, but a lasting solution remains elusive. The Rohingya, caught in the middle, face an increasingly precarious future.
Since late 2018, the conflict between the Arakan army and the Myanmar military has escalated dramatically. The AA has launched numerous attacks on military outposts and government facilities. In response, the Myanmar military has launched brutal counteroffensives, targeting civilians and committing widespread human rights abuses. The conflict has resulted in thousands of deaths and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. The Rohingya, a Muslim minority group in Rakhine State, have been caught in the crossfire. Both the AA and the Myanmar military have committed atrocities against the Rohingya. The Myanmar military has been accused of genocide against the Rohingya, with widespread reports of killings, rapes and torture. The AA has also been accused of targeting Rohingya civilians, displacing them from their homes and attacking their villages. The escalating conflict has had a devastating impact on the Rohingya population.
The Rohingya are one of the most persecuted minorities in the world. For decades, they have faced systematic discrimination and violence in Myanmar. Denied citizenship and basic rights, the Rohingya have been subjected to forced labor, land confiscation, and restrictions on movement and marriage. The 2017 military crackdown, which the UN has called a textbook example of ethnic cleansing, forced over 700,000 Rohingya to flee to Bangladesh. The Rohingya who remain in Rakhine State face a dire situation. They are trapped between the Myanmar military, which views them as terrorists, and the Arakan army, which sees them as outsiders. The Rohingya are often denied access to humanitarian aid and essential services. They are subjected to arbitrary arrests, extortion, and forced labor. Many Rohingya live in fear of being attacked or killed. The conflict in Rakhine State has exacerbated the Rohingya's vulnerability. They are often caught in the crossfire between the AA and the military. Both sides have committed atrocities against the Rohingya, including killings, rapes, and torture. The Rohingya have no safe haven in Rakhine State. The plight of the Rohingya is a stain on the conscience of the world. Despite international condemnation and calls for action, the Rohingya continue to suffer. Their situation is a stark reminder of the failure of the international community to protect vulnerable populations from genocide and crimes against humanity. The Rohingya deserve justice, accountability, and a future free from fear and persecution.
Section 4. The Propaganda War and its Victims. The conflict in Rakhine State is not only a physical battle but also a propaganda war. Both the Arakan army and the Myanmar military use propaganda to demonize their enemies and garner support for their cause. The Rohingya, caught in the middle of this propaganda war, are often dehumanized and portrayed as a threat to national security. This propaganda fuels hatred and prejudice against the Rohingya, making them even more vulnerable to violence and discrimination. The AA, for example, has accused the Rohingya of collaborating with the Myanmar military. They have accused the Rohingya of providing intelligence to the military and of attacking Rakhine villages. These accusations, often based on flimsy evidence or outright fabrications, are designed to turn the Rakhine population against the Rohingya. The Myanmar military, for its part, has used propaganda to justify its brutal crackdown on the Rohingya. They have accused the Rohingya of being terrorists and of seeking to establish an Islamic state in Rakhine. The military has spread false stories about Rohingya atrocities, using them to incite hatred and fear among the Buddhist population. The propaganda war in Rakhine State has real-world consequences. It fuels violence and discrimination against the Rohingya, making it even more difficult to achieve peace and reconciliation. The international community must do more to counter this propaganda and to hold those responsible for spreading hate speech accountable.
Section 5. A history marred by violence and discrimination. The Rohingya crisis is not a recent phenomenon. The Rohingya have faced persecution and discrimination in Myanmar for decades. Their statelessness, a result of discriminatory citizenship laws, lies at the heart of their vulnerability. Denied citizenship, the Rohingya are denied basic rights and freedoms. They are treated as second-class citizens, subject to arbitrary arrests, extortion, and violence. The Rohingya trace their history in Rakhine State back centuries. However, their presence has been contested by successive Burmese governments. During British colonial rule, the Rohingya were administered separately from the Rakhine Buddhists. This policy of divide and rule exacerbated existing tensions between the two communities. After independence in 1948, the Burmese government increasingly viewed the Rohingya with suspicion. They were seen as illegal immigrants from Bangladesh, despite their long history in Rakhine State. The government enacted a series of discriminatory laws and policies that restricted the Rohingyas' rights and freedoms. The 1982 Citizenship Law effectively rendered the Rohingya stateless. The law denied citizenship to groups deemed to have immigrated to Burma after 1823. The Rohingya, despite their long history in Rakhine State, were not recognized as one of the country's 135 official ethnic groups. This law stripped the Rohingya of their citizenship and left them vulnerable to further persecution.
Section 6. The world's response. A glimmer of hope. The international community has condemned the violence against the Rohingya and called for an end to the crisis. The UN has described the situation as a textbook example of ethnic cleansing and has called for the perpetrators to be held accountable. However, concrete action has been limited. The International Criminal Court, or ICC, has opened an investigation into crimes against humanity committed against the Rohingya. However, Myanmar is not a member of the ICC, and the court's jurisdiction is limited. The UN Security Council has been divided on how to respond to the crisis, with China and Russia blocking attempts to impose sanctions on Myanmar. Some countries, including the United States, have imposed targeted sanctions on Myanmar military leaders. However, these sanctions have had little impact on the behavior of the military. Humanitarian aid to the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh has been substantial. However, aid to those trapped in Rakhine State is limited due to government restrictions. The international community's response to the Rohingya crisis has been inadequate. More needs to be done to hold the perpetrators accountable, to protect the Rohingya from further violence, and to address the root causes of the crisis. The Rohingya deserve justice, accountability, and a future free from fear and persecution.
Section 7. The uncertain future of the Rohingya. The future of the Rohingya remains uncertain. The conflict in Rakhine State shows no signs of abating, and the Rohingya remain trapped in a cycle of violence and displacement. The Myanmar government has shown no willingness to address the root causes of the crisis, including the Rohingyas' statelessness and their systematic discrimination. The Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh face an equally uncertain future. Living in overcrowded and unsanitary camps, they are dependent on humanitarian aid for survival. Repatriation to Myanmar remains a distant prospect as the conditions for safe and voluntary return are not in place. The Rohingya are at risk of becoming a lost generation, deprived of their rights and their future. The international community must not forget the Rohingya. More needs to be done to pressure the Myanmar government to create the conditions for safe and voluntary repatriation. This includes granting the Rohingya citizenship, ensuring their safety and security, and providing them with access to basic services. The Rohingya crisis is a test of the international community's commitment to human rights. The world must not fail the Rohingya again. Justice, accountability, and a future free from fear and persecution are the only acceptable outcomes. The Rohingya deserve nothing less.